So you wanted to do a little panic meter on the 0-2 teams, Sam. We want to go through the negatives and maybe shed some light.
Yeah,
some positivity for some of these 0-2 teams. How do you want to do this?
Well, let me give you a rundown of who is currently an 0-2 team. So we got the New England Patriots, we have the Cincinnati Bengals, the Houston Texans, the Denver Broncos, the Los Angeles Chargers, the Minnesota Vikings, the Chicago Bears, the Arizona Cardinals, and the Carolina Panthers. Those are your 0-2 teams in the NFL so far.
All right, so let's start with, teams that we feel good about given their circumstances.
Well, yeah, let's start simply with, can any of these teams pull themselves out of this and actually make the postseason at the end of the year? Because that's the crux conversation always with 0-2. You go 0-2, you're done. You're not coming back. So can any of these teams come back?
First off, as I say every single year, the 0-2 thing is not because it's insurmountable. It's because bad teams generally start 0-2. Or more, there's far more bad teams who start 0-2. The Bengals just got out of it last year, went to the AFC Championship starting 0-2. So it is possible. I think one of the first things to look at is just point differential. Which teams are having some tough luck early on. You can see the Chargers with a point differential of 5. The Broncos have a point differential of 3. First time in NFL history, a team has started 0-2 with a point differential of -3. So a 2-point loss and a 1-point loss, obviously, for those keeping track at home. So those would be the first 2 teams I would start with. Of course, our eternal positivity toward the Chargers. You got to keep that going, despite their defense averaging over 10 yards per attempt, or allowing over 10 yards per attempt. But it looks like the Chargers and Broncos should be able to bounce back from it, especially the Chargers, because I think that offense is going to click even more going forward, and I don't think the defense can be that bad moving forward. They can't be as bad as they've been.
The Chargers are the team. The Chargers are the 1-0-2 team I think might make the playoffs. They're helped by the fact that nobody in that division has scampered off into the distance. Kansas City dropped the game on opening day. That's big. So they're only 1 game behind. And they have the quality, I think, to go on a run and overcome some of that stuff. Like, the offense is the more important part of the game in today's league, and the Chargers' offense looks good. Justin Herbert, the Kellen Moore connection, I think it's only going to get better as the season wears on. They're not tapping in yet to what Quentin Johnston can do, however limited that may be. There's more to come from this offense, and it already looks pretty good. I don't know that you're right that the defense will get better, but even if it doesn't, I think they'll probably be okay. So the Chargers, I think, can still make the playoffs. The Broncos aren't as bad as 0-2, but I don't know that they're good enough to, make the postseason, even if they pull it all together. The other one that has an outside shot is Cincinnati, because we've seen this before. But it all comes down to what Joe Burrow, how long he's going to be out, how long he's going to miss games for. Like, Joe Burrow has already not looked great. He's already looked rusty. He needs to be on the field to get himself through to the other side of that and get to the elite version of Joe Burrow we know exists. But if he's going to be out a couple of weeks and then take another couple of weeks to get the rust off, like, you're running out of games for them to win, even if they go on a run, towards the end of the year, particularly in a tough division. So Cincinnati has a chance, but if Burrow can't get on the field ASAP, the chance disappears.
Can't remember what we were thinking last year at this time, but I do know the Bengals were 0-2 last year after losing to the Steelers. It was a quirky first game. Burrow had 4 interceptions. There was a missed field goal at the end. It was a weird one. And then week 2, they lost to the Cowboys, where Micah Parsons just dominated. They couldn't block him, and the offensive line looked just like they did on the Super Bowl run when they were all injured and Burrow was getting crushed. So I don't know if we were saying, hey, they'll be fine, or if it was kind of panic time. But they did turn it around, and I've given Zach Taylor and that coaching staff a ton of credit for bouncing back from disappointments in the past. But you're right, the X factor is Joe Burrow's calf. If he's healthy, I'd say, hey, we've got enough evidence here. 2-time AFC Championship participants, went to the Super Bowl 2 years ago. Jamar Chase isn't going to, have average 30 yards per game going forward. Those guys will be fine. And we've also seen the Bengals make schematic changes in the middle of the season. You don't always see that from teams, but we've seen the Bengals adjust their run game, adjust their pass game, right? Just 2 years ago, they went from a let's hand it off to Joe Mixon 25 times a game team to let's have Joe Burrow drop back 50 times a game. Let's hand the reins to Joe Burrow in the middle of the 2021 season, which was the right move. So those are the things that have me thinking Cincinnati can figure it out because they have a coaching staff that's willing to adjust on the fly, hide some weaknesses, play to their strengths. But the calf is the entire thing. Like if Joe Burrow doesn't play on Monday Night Football against the Rams, against a real feisty Rams team with Stafford playing pretty well, it could be 0-3. And in and they're still going to play a first place schedule, right? You have the Bills, you have the Chiefs, you have a very difficult schedule if you're the Bengals, especially relative to the rest of the AFC North. So that's the other tricky part, I think, for Cincinnati this year compared to last year. The injury, the fact that they've lost 2 games in the division as well, that's going to be much harder to get out of now than it was maybe last year.
Yeah. No.
And to get out of it last year, Sam, remember the run the Bengals went on in the second half? Every good team in the NFL, they beat on their way to the playoffs. They beat Kansas City. They had a good run on the way to the playoffs. And that's really tough to replicate once again.
Yeah, and they went into that, the postseason with an insane run of simply consecutive wins. Like they dropped another game to Cleveland mid-season because they always lose to Cleveland apparently. But they went on that run that really solidified things. I'm just saying it's possible. Like we know this team is capable of doing that. We saw it last year. I think they're capable of doing it again. But Burrow's health is key. Like he needs to A, get back healthy, and B, can't take too many weeks to get to being 100%. Like even once he's healthy, he can't spend 3 weeks being rusty and not looking like the same guy because they need those wins.
The other 2 0-2 teams, let's just discuss in the AFC. Panic meter for the New England Patriots, they're 0-2, and the Houston Texans. What do you make of those 0-2 starts? We already talked Chargers, Broncos, and Bengals in the AFC.
Yeah, I mean, it depends what your definition of panic is. 0-2 for the Patriots, I think the playoffs might already be gone. The division is probably already gone, certainly, because Miami looks phenomenal and there's too many other good teams there. Panic in terms of will they be terrible? No, like they'll bounce back and they might get somewhere towards 500 or even above it, but they've just put themselves too far behind the 8 ball to be real contenders and probably even to make the playoffs given what the AFC is, even though the AFC's record is bad against the NFC so far this year. So, it depends on your definition of panic for the Patriots. Like it's not crisis stations. They've been in these games, they've been close, but they've put themselves way behind where they need to be.
I think the concerning thing for New England is coming into the season, they felt like they built a team that is what you're going to say, going to be around 500. Maybe they're 7-10, maybe they're 8-9. And they've got some work to do that because they lost their first 2 games at home as well. Good teams, Eagles and Dolphins, but New England only has 6 home games left, starting 0-2.
Right.
But if they're another mediocre team, and they have a history of being a mediocre team in the post-Tom Brady era, it raises even more questions about Bill Belichick, the team building, right? We thought that Bill O'Brien was going to save everything. They've scored 37 points in 2 weeks with a better offense, with an offense that looks night and day better than last year, and they've still only scored 37 points because they're just not explosive. Mac Jones is ineffective throwing the ball down the field, and the playmakers aren't good at catching the ball down the field. It goes back to what we said a lot during the offseason. It's not fantasy football exactly in the NFL, but if you have a mid-tier quarterback, you better focus on your skill position players because they're going to elevate your quarterback, and you're not seeing that in New England right now. Houston's young, and I think they'll play tough, but it's a rebuilding year for Houston again. But I think it's okay to just say, hey, they're still in this rebuild here.
Yeah, they're in a tough spot. Their season is really all about CJ Stroud, and not even necessarily about, but putting him in good positions. Like I think that's part of the problem. They can't have what happened last week against Indianapolis happen too much in terms of getting into this kind of hole where the whole game becomes about chasing the win, like chasing multiple scores in terms of deficit. You got to at least be close enough that you can keep CJ Stroud on a neutral game script, right? Because that helps him. Like that aids his development, which is the most important thing. The problem with some of these bad teams is that it's like it compounds the problem. Like if you suck, you're going to be in a big hole, and then you now need to change the way you call plays on offense which makes life harder for the young quarterback who, the whole thing just spirals. So the biggest thing for Houston is simply not being so bad that it makes things even worse and you have even bigger problems trying to make CJ or help CJ Stroud look at his best.